When the cosmos itself decides to carve a path of destruction, where do you find the will to resist? The dawn broke with a chilling stillness, the clouds languishing in the sky like a bittersweet farewell to a world on borrowed time. The normal rhythm of the city, once pulsating with life, had been replaced by a morbid quiet, broken only by the occasional drone of a far-off siren. This was my home, New Athens, a city once brimming with the echoes of civilization, and now turned into a silent lament under the cosmic entity's gaze. I sat by my workstation in the city observatory, the countless monitors mirroring the horror that loomed overhead. My name is Walter Everett. I used to be an astronomer, peering through the lenses of telescopes and bathing in the silent stories the cosmos whispered. Now I was humanity's reluctant sentinel, an observer of our impending doom. The entity, we'd taken to calling it the Harbinger, hung in the sky, massive, iridescent, an unfathomable cosmic leviathan that had encroached upon our world 3 months ago. In that time, it hadn't moved, hadn't done anything at all, but the science behind its presence, the mere fact of its existence, portended catastrophe. Elsie, my colleague and only companion in this observatory, paced nervously. She was the antithesis of the rest of the city, a whirlwind of activity amidst the stillness. Elsie was a linguist, a scholar of human communication and culture thrown into the deep end of this cosmic mystery. It was her idea, this last-ditch effort to communicate with the entity. It was audacious, desperate, perhaps futile. But in the face of extinction, what option did we have? "I've sent the message," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anxiety and excitement. I looked at her, my eyes silently questioning the sanity of our plan. "What? You got a better idea, Walter?" she shot back, her voice echoing in the silence of the observatory. It's not that I disagreed with her, but the magnitude of what we were attempting was overwhelming. A communication bridge constructed with the fragments of our understanding of the universe, extending towards an entity that dwarfed everything we'd ever known. It felt like throwing paper airplanes into a hurricane. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. Night fell, but the entity cast an otherworldly glow, a beacon of our celestial reckoning. I found myself staring at it, the myriad lights dancing like an aurora of despair. The fear had taken a tangible form now. It wasn't just about the potential obliteration of life as we knew it, but also the confirmation that we were not alone in the universe, and our cosmic neighbors were not benevolent. Elsie had slumped over her desk, exhaustion claiming her, but I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the observatory, my eyes lingering over the dormant telescopes. Once they were our window to the cosmos, our tools to unravel the mysteries of the universe. Now they were mute spectators, relics of a time when we thought we could comprehend the cosmos. In the quiet of the night, amidst the looming existential dread, I found myself reflecting on what we had done, the achievements, the failures, the dreams and ambitions. We'd come so far, clawing our way through the darkness of ignorance, reaching out for the stars, and now, faced with the tangible realization of our insignificance, we were fighting, still hoping, still dreaming. As the entity shimmered ominously in the sky, a cold, uncaring spectator to our plight, I sat down at my desk, staring at the empty black screens. There was nothing more to do but wait, for the end, for salvation, or for an answer from the cosmos. The day had begun, and yet the city lay quiet, holding its breath, as if the world itself was waiting for a whisper from the stars. A chill ran down my spine. We'd sent our message. Now, all we could do was listen. The days were bleeding into each other, each marked by the stillness of the city and the unwavering specter in the sky. After we'd sent the message, Elsie had retreated into a fitful, restless sleep, leaving me alone in the quiet, almost eerie solitude of the observatory. Our team, once brimming with bright minds, had dwindled down to just the two of us. Some had left to be with their families, and others were claimed by the chaos that ensued in the initial days. The silence of the city was broken intermittently by the eerie wail of distant sirens. Despair was a common tongue now. Despite the looming dread, life was persistent. In the calm confines of the observatory, I nurtured a small indoor garden, a modest collection of resilient succulents that had thrived in the care of our horticulturalist team member, Abby. I found comfort in their silent companionship, in the notion of life's stubborn persistence, their tiny green forms a defiance against the sterility of our impending doom. I didn't have Abby's natural touch, but I found solace in trying in the ritualistic watering, the hopeful monitoring for new growth. It was a way to hold on to something living, something real amidst the echoing silence and the uncaring metallic surfaces of the observatory. As days turned into weeks, Elsie and I had formed a silent bond of understanding. We didn't need words to communicate. Her presence was comforting, a constant amidst the ever-changing dread. We ate our meals in silence, working side by side during the day, and huddled over separate consoles during the nights. Her voice would occasionally shatter the silence as she whispered a soothing soliloquy to herself, a practice she said helped keep her focused. I never interrupted her. It was a language of hope, a spoken testament to our resilience. One day, during my routine care of the succulents, I noticed an anomaly. It was subtle, barely noticeable. The leaves of one of the succulents, normally a deep green, had taken on a faint bluish hue. Puzzled, I observed it closely, wondering if it was an effect of the otherworldly glow that the entity bathed our world in. A sense of foreboding washed over me as I realized the implications. Life was adapting, evolving in response to this celestial harbinger, even if we were not. This tiny, silent life form had taken on the color of our apocalypse. I felt a mixture of awe and dread. Life was persistent, but at what cost? I brought Elsie over, her eyes widening in silent understanding. Are they adapting?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I could only shrug, my mind whirling with questions. Could this tiny organism understand the world's predicament better than us, its higher-thinking counterparts? Our roles as the world's sentinels had morphed into the roles of its students, learning from the smallest form of life about adaptation, resilience, and survival. We documented this change, the glow of our monitors a grim contrast to the bluish tinge of the succulent. This was hope, a different kind, a silent testament to the will of life to persist, to adapt. Night had fallen once again, the observatory bathed in the ethereal glow of the entity. It was hauntingly beautiful, a dazzling light show that held the promise of our end. I looked at the succulent again, its bluish leaves reflecting the entity's light. As the sentinel of a dying world, I couldn't help but wonder, would this be our legacy? A world that adapted, a world that changed its colors in the face of apocalypse. We were living on borrowed time, waiting for a whisper from the cosmos. The world had changed, life had adapted. The silent city, the bluish succulents, the haunting glow in the sky, they were all signs of our new reality. The day ended. The silence grew deeper, and in the quiet watch of the observatory, I found myself waiting. Not just for an answer, but for the strength to face what it might mean. The days melded into a monotonous rhythm of waiting. The bluish succulent became my solace and symbol, its evolution under duress a testament to life's tenacity. Each day, I would mark the slightest change in its hue, tracing the subtle variations with an artist's precision. Elsie and I continued to monitor the sky, our every waking hour spent tracking the entity, analyzing every glimmer, every shift in its ethereal dance. Though silent, it was ever present, an unwelcome guest casting an ominous glow over our world. We had tried repeatedly to communicate with it. Every message sent into the void met with the same eerie silence. Our existence had narrowed down to the narrow confine of the observatory, the silent city outside reduced to a ghost of its former self. Elsie became more reclusive, her usual calm demeanor replaced by an unsettling quiet. She would spend long hours hunched over her console, her fingers dancing over the keys, her eyes glued to the monitor. The only breaks in her self-imposed isolation were the meals we shared in silence. I began to notice a change in her. Her eyes seemed haunted, the spark that once resided there replaced by a vacant look. Her skin had turned pale, almost translucent under the glow of the entity. It was as if she was fading, wilting under the weight of our task. I tried to reach out to her, to share my worries, but my words seemed to bounce off the invisible barrier she had erected. One day, Elsie's silent spell was broken. She spoke up, her voice echoing in the hushed expanse of the observatory. "Did you ever think that maybe it's a test? Her words hung in the air, a puzzle I couldn't quite comprehend. "A test?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, echoing her tone. "Yeah," she answered, her gaze never leaving the monitor. "A test for us. For humanity. Maybe the entity isn't the end, but a challenge. Something that forces us to evolve or perish." I remained silent, my mind spinning with her words. Was it possible? Could this silent specter in the sky be a cosmic test, a push for humanity's evolution? The idea seemed ludicrous, yet tantalizing. It resonated with the evolution I was witnessing in my succulent. A test for resilience, for adaptation, for survival. In the silence that followed, I found myself revisiting her words, turning them over in my mind, weighing them against our reality. Could we be misinterpreting the entity's silence? Could our desperate attempts at communication be met with silence not out of malevolence, but indifference, because we were not yet ready? As the days slipped by, her words kept echoing in my mind, shaping my observations. I watched the succulent, its bluish leaves an emblem of evolution. I studied the silent city, its deserted streets a testament to survival. I scrutinized the ethereal entity, its glowing form a riddle wrapped in mystery. The entity remained unchanged, silent as ever, but everything around it was transforming. Life was adapting, learning to exist under this new reality. Perhaps we too needed to change, to evolve to meet this new challenge. The world was silent, but life was shouting its resilience, its will to survive. The city was silent, but it stood defiant against the celestial harbinger. As the chapter of our silence came to an end, I found myself facing a new question. The world was changing. Could we change with it? Could we embrace the silence, not as a sign of our impending doom, but as a symbol of our resilience, our will to adapt and survive? As I closed my eyes against the glow of the entity, I found myself hoping, praying even, that we could. For the world was silent, but we were not. We were still here, still fighting, still evolving, and maybe, just maybe, that was the answer the cosmos was waiting for. The monotonous rhythm of the days had shifted. We were still prisoners within our observatory, our every action controlled by the inscrutable entity. But there was a change in the air. It was as if we had broken free of an unseen shackle, our perception altered by Elsie's hypothesis. Was this entity indeed a test? A cosmic challenge? A gauntlet thrown down by the universe itself? I found myself returning to this question, mulling over it, turning it over in my mind until it echoed in every corner of my thoughts. I would sit for hours, staring at the entity, its luminescent glow never wavering. It was silent, unresponsive, as enigmatic as the day it first appeared in our skies. But now, instead of the ominous dread that used to gnaw at my insides, a strange fascination had started to grow. I could see Elsie too was consumed by this new perspective. She would sit at her console for hours, gazing at the readouts and images of the entity, her brows furrowed in concentration. One day she turned to me, her eyes sparkling with a strange intensity. "We have to try again, Walter. We have to reach out to the entity, but this time we must speak its language." Its language, I wondered. We had tried communicating in every way we knew, sent out messages in every conceivable language, signals, symbols, but all had been met with silence. "What do you mean, Elsie?" I asked, intrigued and somewhat baffled by her statement. "In the language of evolution," she explained. "We need to show it that we understand, that we're willing to adapt, to change, to survive. We need to speak in the language of survival." I was skeptical, but Elsie was adamant. And so we began to change our approach. Our messages were no longer pleas for understanding or demands for answers. Instead, we sent out information about our world, our society, how we had adapted and evolved over the centuries, how we had overcome crises and calamities, and how we were facing this one. At first, there was no discernible change. The entity remained as silent and impenetrable as ever. But we persisted, fueled by this newfound hope, this radical perspective. Each day, we would collate new information, shape it into a story of resilience and adaptation, and send it into the abyss. Days turned into weeks. The succulent continued to thrive, its bluish hue deepening, the spikes growing longer and sharper. The city beyond the observatory seemed to change too, adapting to the eerie glow of the entity, its deserted streets lined with growing weeds and creeping vines. And then, One day, as we sent out another message of adaptation, something happened. The entity flickered. It was a momentary fluctuation, a brief dimming before it resumed its usual glow, but it was enough to send a jolt through us. We stared at each other, wide-eyed and breathless. Could it be a response? We couldn't be sure, but it was the first change we had observed in the entity since it had arrived. We didn't know what it meant, but it gave us a renewed sense of purpose. We were not sure if we had been heard, but we felt seen. The days that followed were filled with renewed vigor. We persisted, undeterred by the uncertainty, driven by the need to communicate, to reach out, to prove our worthiness in this cosmic test. And as each day passed, we grew more attuned to the silence, finding in it not a barrier but a medium, a canvas upon which we could sketch our tale of survival and evolution. In the ensuing weeks, our lives fell into a rhythm of purposeful activity and hopeful anticipation. We continued our efforts, sending out a stream of messages to the silent entity. The tension of the earlier days gave way to an undercurrent of excitement, a sense of connection, of dialogue, even if one-sided. We took turns sleeping, always ensuring one of us was awake to monitor the entity. Its glow became a constant in our lives, a pulsing heartbeat in the otherwise silent observatory. It was during one of these late-night vigils that the entity moved again. I was on the watch, huddled over the console, my eyes barely staying open, when I noticed a subtle shift in the entity. I blinked, certain that sleep deprivation was causing me to hallucinate. But when I looked again, it was unmistakable. The entity had dimmed and was slowly pulsing, casting long shadows across the control room. I hastily woke Elsie, and we watched in awe as the entity pulsed in rhythm, each dimming and brightening following a pattern. Could this be a response? A language? I remembered Elsie's words. The language of survival. The pulsations felt like a heartbeat, a sign of life, a testament of endurance. We painstakingly recorded the patterns, trying to decipher a message or a meaning, but it was beyond anything we knew. Regardless, it was a change, a deviation from the cold, unresponsive luminescence we had grown accustomed to. It was an answer, even if we didn't understand the question. Emboldened by this, we increased our efforts. Our messages grew more elaborate, detailing our technological advancements, our strides in science and medicine, the exploration of our solar system, and our efforts towards understanding the universe. We spoke of our perseverance in the face of adversity, our spirit in the pursuit of knowledge. All the while, our verdant, succulent companion mirrored our tenacity. It had grown considerably, its bluish spikes now casting long, eerie shadows. Its growth, despite the harsh light of the entity, felt like a reflection of our own resilience, a living testament to our struggle. The outside world seemed to mirror our struggle. The city was now a landscape of green, a testament to nature's reclaiming. Buildings were covered in ivy, streets lined with dense shrubbery. The constant glow of the entity had triggered a rapid growth in plant life, turning the once concrete city into a sprawling urban jungle. The world was changing, adapting, just like us. Each day we would send out messages, and each night, the entity would pulse in response. The rhythm became a beacon, a sign of connection, a beacon in the dark silence of our isolation. We didn't know what it meant, what message, if any, the entity was trying to convey. But it was a dialogue, however one-sided, and it gave us hope. And yet, despite the connection, the entity remained an enigma. We were still prisoners within our observatory, trapped by an extraterrestrial force beyond our understanding. We had no answers, only more questions. But the flicker of connection, the flicker of understanding kept us going. We were not alone in our struggle. We were being seen, heard, acknowledged. It was not much, but it was enough. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the excitement began to wane, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. What did the entity want? Why was it here? Were our efforts even making a difference? The entity's pulses gave no answers, only more questions. And as the entity continued to remain an enigma, our resolve began to falter. Despite the small victories, we were still in the dark, still grappling with the enormity of our situation. The stakes had never been higher. We had taken a step forward, but the path ahead remained shrouded in mystery. One day, amidst our regular transmission schedule, the entity suddenly dimmed. Elsie and I watched in horror as the constant beacon we'd come to rely on suddenly started to flicker. The patterns were erratic, chaotic, nothing like the rhythmic pulses we'd seen before. We scrambled to understand this new development, our minds buzzing with fearful possibilities. Had we offended the entity, or was it in trouble calling out to us for help? Hours turned into days, and the flickering showed no signs of stopping. We monitored the readings closely, looking for any clue, any pattern. But the more we tried to understand, the more confounding it became. Elsie, a born optimist, was the first to suggest that this might be a different kind of communication. Perhaps, she speculated, the entity was attempting to reach out in a more human way, a language we could understand. We reviewed our transcripts, looking for any pattern that resembled a known language or a mathematical sequence, but found nothing. Days bled into nights, and we started to lose track of time. Sleep became a luxury, our dreams haunted by the flickering entity. We were running on coffee and determination, our bodies protesting against the constant strain. One late-night vigil, I found myself alone in the control room. Elsie was in the makeshift sleeping quarters, catching a few hours of much-needed sleep. The room was bathed in the entity's flickering glow, casting moving shadows across the walls. Despite the fear, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. I looked at our thriving succulent, its form dancing in the unstable light. It had grown taller, its spikes now standing straight, pointing towards the entity. Staring at it, a thought struck me. What if the plant was the key? I remembered Elsie's words from months ago, the language of survival. Plants have their language of growth, of endurance, an intricate pattern of survival written in their genes. Could this be the same language the entity was trying to speak? With a new sense of purpose, we set to work. We studied the plant's growth patterns, its reaction to the entity's light. We pored over countless research papers, trying to understand the language of plants. The more we learned, the more it seemed plausible. Days turned into weeks, and we had started to see a pattern. The entity's flickering mirrored the plant's growth pattern. It was a language of survival, just not one we had ever anticipated. With renewed hope, we started a new round of communication. We focused on life on Earth, its diversity and resilience. We talked about our planet's plant life, the way they adapted and thrived in the harshest conditions. We spoke of our symbiotic relationship with them, our dependency on their survival. And the entity responded. The erratic flickering reduced, its luminance stabilizing. It was a small victory, but it was a step forward, a testament to our endurance. But as we celebrated, the outside world continued to change. Plants had now taken over the city completely, the skyscrapers now resembling towering jungles. The world outside our observatory was transforming, adapting to the entity's glow. And we, trapped in our observatory, could only watch in awe and fear, the full impact of our actions yet to reveal itself. We had established a connection, but at what cost? As the entity's light flooded our small world, I couldn't help but feel a sense of impending doom. The entity was no longer just an outsider. It had become a part of our world, a part of us. And as we continued our dialogue, I couldn't help but wonder, were we merely pawns in a larger game? Had we invited an apocalypse of our own making? Only time would tell. Darkness encroached on our observatory for the first time in months, and I realized how much I had missed the respite of the night. The eerie glow of the entity had been replaced by a malevolent black sphere. The succulent, once thriving in the alien light, wilted and decayed. The world outside had changed as well. The emerald sheen of rampant vegetation replaced by a landscape of ash and smoke. The city was consumed by the implosion. Elsie and I were left in the silent aftermath, our communication station now useless. We had lost contact with the outside world, our cries for help bouncing back unanswered. The observatory had become our island of isolation amidst the rubble of our decimated world. Despite the looming despair, Elsie's optimism refused to waver. "We've been here before, right?" she would often say. "We faced the unknown and we survived. We'll do it again." I admired her tenacity, her unwavering resolve in the face of imminent danger. But I couldn't shake off the feeling that we had crossed a point of no return. Our attempts to communicate had brought about our demise. We were the architects of our own downfall. Days turned into weeks, and the observatory started to show signs of decay. Our resources were dwindling, the emergency supplies nearing their end. Without the entity's light, the temperature had dropped drastically, the chill seeping into our bones. Outside, the life that had once thrived was now gone. The plants that had grown rampantly were now rotting piles of biomass. The city was a desolate ruin, its towering buildings now crumbling skeletons. Our world was a shadow of its former self, a silent testament to our hubris. The harsh realities of our situation became more apparent with each passing day. We were alone, trapped in an apocalyptic nightmare of our own creation. But amidst the despair, we found a strange solace. We found comfort in our shared guilt, our shared responsibility. We were two survivors, clinging onto the shards of our broken world. One cold night, Elsie broke down. The strong facade she had been maintaining crumbled, and she wept. I held her, the pain and regret coursing through us. We cried for our world, for our ignorance, for the lives lost due to our actions. But in our despair, we found a sense of unity, a strange bond. We were no longer just colleagues, we were survivors. We were a testament to the resilience of humanity, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. When Elsie's sobs subsided, she looked at me, her eyes filled with a newfound determination. "We can't give up," she whispered. "Not yet. Not while we still have each other." Elsie's words sparked a glimmer of hope in my heart. Despite the desolation, we had each other, and that was our strength. We still had a chance to survive, to learn from our mistakes. We had been given a second chance, and we were not about to waste it. As we huddled together in our decaying observatory, the sky outside was a blanket of impenetrable darkness. But we were not afraid. We had been in the dark before, and we had found the light. The darkness was just another obstacle, another challenge. And we were ready to face it. We were ready to survive, to rebuild, to repent. Elsie and I worked diligently over the following weeks, scraping together what we could from the decimated surroundings. Our task was not just to survive, but to do what we could to rectify our mistakes, to reach out and perhaps help anyone else who might have survived the fallout. One morning, our efforts bore fruit. Amid the deafening silence, there was a crackle from our communication station, a garbled message breaking through. The world outside wasn't completely desolate. There were other survivors. The voice was faint, filled with static, but unmistakably human. They were from a town several hundred miles away, a small community of people who had somehow survived the catastrophic implosion. Their existence was a glimmer of hope, a testament to humanity's tenacity. Elsie and I felt a surge of hope, a buoy to cling onto amidst the ocean of despair. We were not alone. We were still connected, however faintly, to the rest of the world. Our task took on a renewed sense of urgency, the daunting reality of the situation replaced by a ray of hope. We spent our days and nights working on improving our communication, optimizing our makeshift antenna, improving the signal. The connection was spotty at best, but it was a lifeline. It was proof that we were not the last humans on Earth, that we could reach out and reconnect. In between our tireless efforts to communicate, we learned to adapt to the harsh reality of our new world. We foraged for food, hunted the small creatures that had somehow survived. We rationed our supplies, each morsel of food, each drop of water, a precious commodity. As time passed, our communication with the outside world improved. We managed to establish a stable connection, the messages coming in clearer. There were other pockets of survivors, groups of people who had found a way to withstand the catastrophe. We shared our knowledge, our resources. We helped each other, sharing tips on survival, on navigating the new world. Despite the isolation, the desolation, we were still a community, bound together by our shared struggle for survival. Elsie and I started to broadcast our messages, our calls for help echoing through the airwaves. We had become a guiding light amidst the chaos. Our observatory was no longer a symbol of our downfall, but a symbol of rebirth. Our nights were filled with the soft hum of the radio, the faint whispers of other survivors. The observatory, once a place of desolation, was now a hub of activity. Amidst the darkness, the ruins of our world, we had found a way to rebuild, to survive. I remember one night as we huddled together for warmth, the radio crackling softly in the background. Elsie looked at me, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the radio. "We did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the radio. "We're not alone." Her words echoed in the silence, a declaration of our victory, of our survival. We had faced the darkness, the destruction, and we had prevailed. We had come together, unified by our shared struggle, our shared responsibility. As we listened to the soft whispers of the survivors, their stories of resilience, of hope, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. We had overcome our mistakes, our hubris. We had learned, grown, evolved. In the end, the entity that had brought about our destruction had also been our salvation. It had forced us to confront our follies, to unite and survive. It had reminded us of our humanity, of our resilience, as the entity continued to loom over us. A silent reminder of our past mistakes. I couldn't help but feel hopeful. We had been given a second chance, and we had seized it. We had learned from our mistakes. We had grown. We were ready to rebuild, to start anew. We were ready to face whatever the future held for us, to forge a new world from the ashes of the old. Hey sci-fi horror fans, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. We appreciate you tuning in. A special thanks to all our official supporting members. Your support means a lot to us. Craving for another scary tale? Click that video on your screen. Until next time, everyone. And remember, stay cosmic.